Parashat Shemot opened the second book of the Torah, which is also called the Book of Redemption. Now, this portion begins with the origins of the Jewish people as they become a nation. It opens with a list of the names of the children of Israel as they came down to Egypt, while in counting or taking under consideration each individual within those houses, within those families. However, the weird thing is that in this portion, which is called the portion of names, as we know Shemot in Hebrew, it means names, it's the portion of names, this portion does not mentioning any names in what we can see as an intentional matter or manner. In the beginning of this portion, we have no names. It's like no one here has its own identity. We have obviously the names of the 12 children of Yaakov. Every tribe represent a different approach for the divine service to take place, but that is about it. All the rest of the names are hidden. We have a man from the house of Levi. We have a woman from the house of Levi. We have his sister. We have the child. We have the lad. We have Pharaoh's daughter. We have the midwives, the Egyptian king, the Midian priest, his daughters. Now we know that the man from the tribe of Levi is Amram, Moshe's father, just as we know that the woman from the tribe of Levi is Yocheved, Moshe's mother. And we know that the sister that stood from afar, it's Miriam. We know that the child is Moshe. We know that the weeping lad, sages say that this is Aaron. We know that Pharaoh's daughter is Batya. We know that the Egyptian king obviously is Paro, and that the priest of Midian is Yitro. We know all those names because we know this story. But if we were to read this story from in the first time, we would understand or see or come to the realization that there are no names in this story, in the beginning of this story. It's like all the names here are hidden. So what is the matter here? Like, why is it like this? Why no one of the characteristics in this portion, in the beginning of it, is referred to by its name? And well, first, we can look at it as the word Shemot, names in Hebrew, is like the word Neshamot, which is the high form of the soul. In Hebrew, we don't really have the parallel translation to Neshama. So we have, Neshama is like a higher form of the soul. So Shemot and Neshamot is basically the same word. The only difference between those words are the letter Nun, which is 50. In number, which represents the divine presence, the neshama. Now the names are the souls, and all souls now are in exile. And furthermore, this story refers to each of us at the soul level. We are all in this story. We are the names, we are the souls. And so in this portion, we start our journey of becoming a nation, and we are to find ourselves in each and every one of these characters inside this nation. We need to become the lad, the child, the man from the tribe of Levi, the woman from the tribe of Levi. We are to be his sister, the Pharaoh's daughter even, and the king of Egypt. Now the first name, however, we encounter with through this portion is a name that has been given. It says about Pharaoh's daughter that she named him Moshe, for I drew him from the water. Now the Zohar tells us that in each and every one of us, we have the spark of Moshe inside of us. But before we start to discuss about this spark inside of us, about this wonder child, about this very important characteristic that we have Moshe, the redeemer of the Israeli nation, this great force inside of us that have the power to redeem all souls, let us take a look first at the scenery that was constructed as background to the story of its birth. So, feeling threatened by the presence of the children of the nation of Israel in his land, the king of Egypt begins a multi-staged plan of isolation and oppression in order to estrange the Hebrew people from the Egyptian society. And if And as if anticipating Pharaoh's next move, the Torah then sets the stage by describing Israel as what we can call colony of insects even. The children of Israel were fruitful and swarmed and increased and became very strong, and the land became filled with them. Now the king of Egypt saw all this and was beginning to be afraid that this power, that this nation, this insects nation will start to overcome his own. So he then ordered the Hebrew midwives to kill any male child of the Hebrew woman and to let the girls live. But he wanted to let the girls live under Egyptian rules. Now, we need to remember that in Kabbalistic terms, a man by its mythical definition is the will to contribute or the power to influence, while a woman, and he is signified by the midah of the attribute of chesed, while a woman in the mythical definition of the desire to receive, signified by the midah or the attribute of gvura. Now we are talking here about the holy forces that stand against each other as men and women, but when unite, those holy forces stand against the unholy forces or the impure forces of impurity, because we know that we have the purified forces of holiness and against them stand the forces of impurity, and we have this outside and inside as well. So we have the Hebrews as the purified and the holy, and we have the Egyptians as the unholy and impure. Now, taking under the fact that a boy, now remember, this boy and girl are supposed to, something is going to happen to them. Now, taking under the fact that a boy is due to become a man and that the girl is due to become a woman, we can see that this small fraction of the story, as it stands as itself, contains a much deeper meaning for us. In the boy lays the human potential, we can say, of becoming influential, of becoming a power that is able to influence. And therefore Pharaoh wished to kill this form of influence, holy influence, pure influence, at its beginning, at its core. But it wasn't enough for him. He also wanted to take all holy forces that have the ability to absorb, the ability or the natural demand to receive, as hostages of the Egyptian nation, making them all absorb Egyptian culture and costumes to the fullest. Now Pharaoh is basically planning a war. This is a spiritual war that he's planning. He wants to destroy the powers of holiness in every way possible and thereby strengthening the powers of impurity. But the Jewish midwives, however, were clever. Women in Kabbalistic terms always represent the soul, the high neshama, we can say. And the war that they saw that Pharaoh is declaring or aiming towards was not in their best interest. And that is because the soul has a natural attraction to what is good, to the divine, to the upper realms, to the qualities of purity, as it is godly. The soul. So when confronted by Pharaoh for disregarding his order, they claimed that the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian woman, and that before they're more vigorous, and even before they are approaching them, the women have already gave birth. So Pharaoh understands that this won't do it, like he cannot use the holy forces to kill the holy forces. He then, still convinced in his righteousness, he will want to use his own forces, his own army of forces, the will to receive forces which are represented by the Egyptian people, and with them to try and kill the Jewish people. So, and it would seem as if he would succeed, right? Because we have here an entire army of forces trying to win over the impurity forces against the purified or the pure forces, the powers of the Tum'ah forces against the powers of Kedusha, of holiness, of purity. And the numbers of the purified ones are starting or beginning to shrink. However, at the same time, at the same dramatic stage of the story, the Redeemer is born. And again, this story, this whole scenery is happening inside yourself, inside us. We have inside us this Pharaoh king. We have inside us this the midwives, those forces that do not want to be controlled by this will to receive, which is Pharaoh. We have inside us this child that is about to be born. And again, note that according to this story, as we said before, this child, Moshe, is born to a Gendo family, a man of the house of Levi that went and married with a woman from the house of Levi. Now, this story speaks about us, about our soul, and of the forces that we will encounter through our journey, even and especially in time of exile. And there is no specific identity here, because the identity can reflect each and every one of us, and in us we have all identities together. Even though we are at war, a silent, harsh war with the forces of impurity at this point, the redeeming force inside us is awakening. The redeeming force inside us is going to be born, and in accordance to its task of living, he must be rooted in the forces of holiness, in the forces of purity. But also, as we can say, or as we know, Moshe grew up as an Egyptian prince, and this means that this Redeemer inside of us must also be very much familiar with the forces of impurity as well. To win our enemies, we need to know them, but to know them good, to know them not in just a superficial way, to know them in the most deepest sense of the word or of the meaning. This force, Moshe, was infused by both worlds, and therefore was able to extend something that is more divine in each and every one of them. And because of that, he could not stay in that place for long. Because if he were to stay in this place for long, he would either be consumed by the forces of impurity, or he would be condemned by the forces of purity, as we actually saw when that's exactly what happened when he met the two Egyptian people, and later on the two Hebrew people. So he was forced to leave his natural environment and to become isolated for a while. In a way, Moshe, as a very special character in this story, had been experiencing an exile within an exile. Now let us try and understand why. Well, this force inside of us, Moshe, must be isolated for a while. Others cannot influence this force, and this is important. And this is important because as the future leader of the Israeli nation, Moshe needs to develop a steady, strong, and powerful mindset that would not be submerged into the mindset of others. And his identity needs to be infused by a greater power than the power that he already knows, than the forces he is familiar with. This power, this greater power, we would usually encounter when we are isolated, alone, when we're not taking under our consideration any external influences, because this power is a calling from within. Now, many people who affect dramatic change in the world speak of having had a calling, a powerful pull towards a particular life task or a path of action they felt like they have to take. In the Torah, God appears frequently as the emissary of divine calling, inspiring people to rise to their destined role, to rise to their destined path of duty. Avraham and Sarah had their encounter with the angels. Yaakov had his encounter with the angels in the night. We know that Eliyahu have heard the silence calling him. Those are just few examples of how the story usually goes. But as we said last portion, we are in a different time period now. We don't have gods and the angels talking to us. We are not at the forefather stage. We are at a different stage, at the stage of becoming a nation. And things are about to become more natural and still more divine. Now, today, in a world where we cannot rely on some inspirational thing or a calling or a burning bush that will come and inspire us, how will we recognize our calling? Here in this portion, the divine indeed appeared to Moshe as the burning bush that does not burn up, a sight that we can all agree that is not a normal sight and that we are not about to encounter this. The burning bush has two meanings, though. First, it represented the nation of Israel that is in exile. This dry bush is isolated in the desert, have no water to drink from, without any source of something that will give him life. But it is even, it has even flames, but it's not burning up, because just like the souls of Israel, that they are in exile and they under a heavy matter of work and toils and tasks of the Egyptians. They're slaves to the Egyptian people, and still they stay alive with warm flames of belief, hoping that one day will come and they will be redeemed of this situation and will be back to the land of their ancestors, to the Holy Land. Now the second, this burning bush in the wilderness that goes up in flames but does not burn, represents the heart of Moshe, or we can say, in a way, represent our heart in this story. That is usually the reason for us to make a stand or to rise towards some sort of a calling. The heart sometimes burns inside us, just like fire. This is happening when we do what we find as a calling. Sometimes, or we can say, at this point of the story, something is burning inside of Moshe, something that will not go away. His intuitive opposition to the slavery that has been taking on in Egypt for his fellow men. This is the message that emanates from the eternal flames that he sees in the bush, the awareness that arises in his heart, the fire, the flames. Now Moshe cannot extinguish the fire within him, nor can he escape its heat. And this burning bush revelation ultimately empowers him to return to Egypt and to take a stand and to redeem the Israeli nation. This is our we can say paradigmatic tale of calling, yet it challenges the conventional definition of this term as something that one was born to accomplish. We need to accomplish this calling. Moshe's epiphany is not that he is destined to be the Redeemer or to complete his mission. God does not promise him success, and so he is fearful, but still he chooses to try, and he listens to the divine calling. This week, like Moshe, we must ask ourselves, what is our burning bush? Or which injustice in the world makes us cry or cringe or scream? What is my true cause for which I'm most equipped to act for or in regards? Moshe certainly lacked confidence when encountering the burning bush. In the presence of this burning bush, he expresses his heaviest anxieties. He feels inadequate and weak. He fears the unknown and the what-ifs that are about to be in the future. Even God's word and wonders cannot dissolve his anxieties and doubts. However, just as Moshe, we are too must overcome our fears, must overcome our doubts. We should always remember the words of Hashem as they have been given to Moshe. Who gave man a mouth? Or who makes one dumb or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, Hashem? And also the name of Hashem, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I shall be what I shall be. Just start, walk, leave everything behind, leave the doubts behind, they're not relevant, just start to walk. The inevitable waves of nervousness and self-doubts cannot deter us from taking an action in regarding to our call. We cannot wait until we feel completely ready, for that will never happen. Rather, we must draw strength from the everlasting flames within our heart and to act upon its burning whenever it happens. And we must believe in divine providence, in personal divine providence, that it would lead us to our right path, to exactly where we need to go. And sometimes, even if we lack confidence that we will succeed, or we need to have confidence not in our own abilities or powers, but in the divine power, in the divine will, in the divine God abilities to take us wherever we need to go. And so Moshe stresses the complexity of his own fate, and this is understandable because he was a stranger in a foreign land. And even though he was raised as a powerful prince of Egypt, he was always divided, conflicted. He always felt alienated in whatever environment he was, not really living as a Jewish person with his fellow Jewish brothers in the land of Goshen, and not really feeling at home in Pharaoh households while wearing his Egyptian garments. And us too, as spiritual beings in this material world, we too, usually, if not always, wear garments. Whether it is garments of behavior, manners, attitudes, or even surroundings, externals or internals, our garments sometimes come along with our state of living, status, false wishes, and social conducts. We, just like Moshe, must learn how to not be consumed by those garments. We need to differentiate ourselves from those garments. We must know how to look beyond them in ourselves and in others as well. Only after we've managed to get rid of these garments, only then we would be able to confront our true essence and willingly follow our true calling and start our way. The way Moshe was doing it, differentiate himself from his garments, was by fleeing to the furthest reaches of the desert and beginning a new life in a remote community. From a prince in Pharaoh's court, Moshe plummeted to the lowly rank of a shepherd in the household of the Midian priest Yitro, reasons enough to become quite disoriented. Now, if we will take this story and try to find ourselves in it, we would find it correlates perfectly with where we are in this time. We usually go through many stages of exile and redemption in our lives. As we said last week, we are now our situation right now, or where we are located right now in the story, in this point in time, is in Egypt. And Egypt is not the natural place for us to be in. It is not our natural environment. We experience many situations in life in which we feel in exile, in which we feel this is not our natural environment, where we feel that the place we're in does not completely characterize us or makes justice with us. We feel sometimes that the place we're in does not allow us to move forward, maybe, or to progress, or to reach our true calling. In this point in time, when in Egypt, as we are sucked into the daily tasks and toils of this material world, our will to receive the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh inside of us, is trying to control us, and he's doing this by gathering an army of forces of impurity and trying to isolate us from holiness. When we start feeling this spiritual war coming and raging against us and coming to claim us, we must pause for a minute. We must get out of this environment we are in, and I'm not talking about physical environment, obviously. And we must try and recalculate and rethink about who we are, about why we are, and why have we been placed exactly where we are in this point in time. What benefits do we have? What differentiates us from others? What is our divine calling? And where does our heart take us? And what is that we are drawn to, but really drawn to? We must take a break and reconsider everything. How can we be in unity with who we really are, underneath all those garments we were wearing all this time? And ask yourself, what is your real name in this nameless portion? But really, in general, what's your name? Who is the one that is calling you? And by which name this power is calling? And who gives you even the power to act? What does he say to you? And listen to the divine, because this week you are going to be summoned, and you will need to start and take the first step towards whatever this is, but you will have to, because the circle of Jewish exile and redemption, as we witnessed in this portion, is significant for the world at large, but is also a very internal cycle that we can feel within ourselves, coming and going all the time. The purpose of creation is, as we know, to establish God's name in creation, in the world, in our lives. And in this portion, this dwelling is fashioned by the involvement in different aspects of worldly experiences and worldly tasks. Remember, the Hebrews were slaves to the Egyptian nation and worked hard to build their cities, Pitom v'Ramses. So during exile, the Jews, meaning us, are scattered into different lands and brought into contact with diverse cultures. And as godly soul, we are in exile just by being a soul, a godly soul in this earthly world. However, the challenge of exile brings us to a deeper connection with Hashem, and it elevates our surroundings no matter where we are. Now, the saga of exile and redemption is not merely a story of the past. On the contrary, the constant transition from exile to redemption are affecting all dimensions of our life and of our existence, even today. This week, things can get intense and tend to be extreme, and we will need to stay strengthened and focused. We will need to isolate ourselves, our mindset, from foreign external influences which will try to control us, to overtake us, which will try to kill or kidnap the little boy and girl inside of us, our dreams, our true calling, this voice that is calling us, this burning bush that we find in the desert. This week we are to build strong mindset, because this Moshe spark that just entered to the picture is an important figure that will accompany us for the rest of our journey in the desert, coming to the land of Israel, to the Holy Land, to the promised land, to the land of our ancestors. And we would walk through this desert with him as a leader. And we would then need to rely on him as the leader. And again, remember, this is a point within yourself that needs to lead you through the process of living. So you need to be very, very well tuned with the fact that he is born right now in this portion. We are to become the leaders we are supposed to be, because our entire nation's survival depends on it. So remember all those things as you come inside this portion and come inside this new book. I hope to see you next week in the next portion, and have a Shabbat Shalom.